In this episode, we're looking at when illegal pet holders got revenge from their own pets, from a Florida man's hidden alligator to a former trainer's final confrontation with a grown chimpanzee. But first, we begin outside Ocala, where one man's 12-year obsession with a reptilian giant would end in horror. It was July 28, 2016, when the afternoon heat settled over the rural outskirts of Ocala, Florida. The temperature had climbed past 95 degrees, and humidity hung thick in the air. Daryl Kaminsky, a 34-year-old unemployed construction worker, had kept a 9-foot, 250-pound American alligator illegally in his backyard since acquiring it as a hatchling through an online exotic pet network in 2004. He had constructed a reinforced above-ground pool surrounded by chain-link fencing on the edge of the Ocala National Forest, where the isolation kept the animal largely undetected. His girlfriend had left him 8 months earlier, telling investigators he had grown obsessed with the alligator at the expense of their relationship. Neighbors had filed complaints with animal control, but Kaminsky avoided consequences by relocating the animal during inspections. He fed it whole chickens weekly, though the schedule had grown irregular as his finances deteriorated. His unemployment benefits were exhausted, he was facing eviction, and investigators noted he had been drinking heavily that afternoon. Phone records showed almost no outgoing calls in the previous 6 weeks. A notebook in his kitchen contained calculations of the animal's sale value alongside overdue rent notes, suggesting he had begun viewing the alligator as his last financial asset. Despite this, neighbors said he still referred to it by name, describing it as the one thing in his life that had never let him down. American alligators are powerful ambush predators, capable of explosive acceleration from a resting position. Adult males typically reach lengths of 10 to 15 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds. Though 9-foot specimens commonly weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. They possess among the strongest bite forces of any living animal, capable of crushing bone and pinning large prey with ease. Alligators employ a hunting technique called the death roll, spinning rapidly while gripping prey to tear away flesh and disorient victims. In confined spaces, particularly water, they become especially dangerous. That afternoon, Kaminsky had apparently decided to clean the pool, where algae buildup had reduced water clarity to near zero, following a filtration failure weeks earlier. Investigators found a scrub brush near the edge, and the surrounding concrete was wet. At approximately 4:30 p.m., his heavily intoxicated state likely compromised his balance as he walked the narrow ledge, and he slipped into the 4-foot deep water beside the alligator. The impact and sudden movement appear to have triggered the alligator's predatory response. The animal struck almost immediately, its jaws clamping around Kaminsky's torso with devastating force. The bite was consistent with multiple rib fractures, and the alligator initiated the death roll. In the confined space of the above-ground pool, Kaminsky had no room to maneuver. The alligator's spinning motion drove him underwater repeatedly, filling his lungs with pool water while the crushing bite prevented effective breathing. The severity of rotational injuries documented during autopsy indicated the death roll had been sustained and violent. A neighbor returning home at approximately 7:15 p.m. noticed unusual stillness in Kaminsky's yard. The absence of the typical splashing sounds that usually indicated feeding time prompted him to investigate cautiously. He discovered Kaminsky floating face down in the pool, the alligator resting at the opposite end, showing no signs of continued aggression. Emergency services arrived within 20 minutes. The medical examiner estimated time of death sometime that afternoon based on body temperature and lividity patterns, concluding that Kaminsky had likely drowned before severe blood loss could occur, though the crushing trauma to his chest cavity would likely have proven fatal regardless. The combination of blunt force trauma, rib fractures, and water inhalation was consistent with a rapid death following the initial attack. Animal control officers used specialized equipment to secure and remove the alligator, which showed no resistance to capture. The investigation confirmed Kaminsky's illegal possession of the animal and determined alcohol intoxication as a contributing factor to his death. The alligator was transferred to a licensed facility, where it remains today. While Florida's backyard had claimed one illegal pet owner, the open spaces of East Texas would soon demonstrate that big cats never truly lose their predatory instincts, regardless of captivity duration. It was November 12, 2014, when the late autumn afternoon brought cooler temperatures to the rural property outside Livingston, Texas. For Brecken LaRue, a 41-year-old unlicensed exotic animal broker, the 15-acre spread represented both his home and his illegal business operation. The reinforced kennel in the far corner of the property housed his most valuable asset, a 3-year-old male Bengal tiger. LaRue had entered the exotic animal trade 5 years earlier after losing his job at a cattle ranch initially dealing in reptiles and small mammals before graduating to big cats through the unregulated network of private breeders scattered throughout rural Texas. He had no formal training in animal husbandry or large predator management, relying on advice from other unlicensed brokers and internet forums. The tiger had been acquired as a 10-month-old cub from a breeder in Oklahoma, raised with the intention of selling it at a profit once it reached full maturity. His only employee, a part-time helper who assisted with feeding 3 days a week, had expressed concerns about the tiger's increasing aggression as it approached sexual maturity. LaRue dismissed these warnings, insisting he understood the animal and that the tiger recognized him as its handler. Investigators would later note that this overconfidence was a recurring factor in fatal exotic animal incidents across the state. Tigers are apex predators capable of taking down prey significantly larger than themselves. Adult males commonly weigh between 400 and 600 pounds, with canine teeth reaching 3 inches in length. A tiger's killing bite targets the throat or back of the neck, capable of severing the spinal cord or crushing the windpipe. Despite being raised in captivity, tigers retain complete hunting instincts, and males become increasingly aggressive as they reach sexual maturity around age 3. Feeding time represents one of the highest risk periods for human-tiger interaction. That afternoon, LaRue followed his standard feeding routine, carrying 30 pounds of raw beef in a plastic bucket. The kennel included a feeding slot that allowed him to deposit food without entering the enclosure, but he had developed a habit of opening the main gate partially to push the bucket through. This shortcut eliminated the primary safety barrier between him and the tiger. According to the subsequent investigation, the gate's latch mechanism had deteriorated significantly due to rust and weather exposure. The lock that should have secured the gate in the closed position had been malfunctioning for several weeks, something LaRue had acknowledged to his helper, but had not repaired. Metal shavings and rust found near the latch indicated the mechanism had been binding and releasing unpredictably. At approximately 3:45 p.m., LaRue opened the gate approximately 12 inches to slide the food bucket through. The tiger, alert to feeding time and already positioned near the gate, had learned this routine over months of repetition. As LaRue pushed the bucket forward, the corroded latch failed completely under the combined pressure of his pushing and the tiger's weight against the gate. The gate swung open under pressure from the tiger's weight as the animal moved forward. The opening expanded to approximately 3 feet within seconds. LaRue attempted to pull the gate closed, but 400 pounds of muscle and momentum overpowered his efforts instantly. The tiger emerged from the kennel in a single explosive movement. LaRue stumbled backward, but managed only 2 steps before the tiger closed the distance. The attack was violent and chaotic. The tiger lunged at LaRue's upper body, its jaws tearing into his neck and the base of his skull. The mauling caused catastrophic trauma to his cervical spine and likely damaged major blood vessels, injuries consistent with the killing techniques tigers use on large prey. LaRue collapsed to the ground almost immediately, likely losing consciousness quickly, as blood loss and spinal trauma overwhelmed his body. The massive canine teeth had inflicted deep puncture wounds across his neck and shoulders. The tiger eventually disengaged and moved several yards away. Blood trail evidence showed LaRue had attempted to crawl several feet before collapsing. LaRue died rapidly from his injuries. His body remained where it fell as the tiger retreated to the far side of the property. The helper arrived 90 minutes later for scheduled maintenance and immediately recognized the emergency upon seeing the open kennel gate and LaRue's body. He contacted authorities from his vehicle, unwilling to approach while the tiger remained loose. Law enforcement and animal control arrived within 40 minutes, tranquilizing the tiger and transporting it to a licensed sanctuary. The investigation revealed multiple violations of Texas exotic animal regulations and identified at least 12 other illegal animals on the property, which was subsequently seized. Investigators confirmed the gate's mechanical failure had allowed the escape, concluding that the known latch malfunction represented gross negligence in the handling of a dangerous animal. While the Texas property had witnessed the price of mechanical failure and overconfidence, the remote mountains of West Virginia would soon reveal the deadly danger of pack dynamics among animals that retain their wild instincts. It was February 4, 2017, when winter cold gripped the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Snow covered the ground around the isolated cabin where Callaway Riggs, a 33-year-old unemployed mechanic, had lived alone for the past 18 months. In the converted garage behind the cabin, 3 wolf-dog hybrids paced their reinforced kennel area, their breath visible in the freezing air. Riggs had acquired them as 8-week-old puppies in spring 2014 from a Montana breeder, paying $1,200 each. Genetic testing would later confirm a high percentage of wolf DNA, making them functionally closer to wild wolves than domestic dogs. Now nearly 3 years old, each weighed between 90 and 110 pounds, the property sat at the end of a 3-mile dirt road that became impassable in heavy snow. Riggs had purchased the cabin before his marriage collapsed, drawn to the isolation as a refuge. His ex-wife told investigators he had grown obsessed with the animals, prioritizing their care over human relationships and dismissing her concerns about their growing aggression. His divorce had been finalized 14 months earlier. The converted garage provided roughly 600 square feet, connected to an outdoor run enclosed by reinforced chain-link fencing. Riggs fed the animals raw meat and deer carcasses despite being largely unemployed. His county required special permits for hybrid canines, permits Riggs had never obtained. His nearest neighbors lived over a mile away. Wolf-dog hybrids are particularly difficult to manage due to wolf pack behavior, combined with reduced fear of humans. High-content hybrids retain complex pack hierarchies and territorial aggression, with powerful jaws capable of crushing bone. Pack dynamics can produce coordinated aggression targeting the throat and legs. Unlike domestic dogs, they rarely develop submissive behaviors. Multiple fatal attacks have involved hybrids turning on owners, particularly when pack dynamics shift. Evidence suggested recent aggression between 2 of the males in the days prior. Neighbors reported intense howling and snarling during the 3 nights preceding the attack. On the afternoon of February 4th, at approximately 2:30 p.m., Riggs entered the garage area carrying food. Physical evidence suggested the 2 male hybrids were engaged in an aggressive confrontation when he arrived, consistent with a dominance conflict within the pack hierarchy. Blood found on the concrete floor indicated at least one animal had sustained injuries during the conflict before Riggs's arrival. Rather than waiting for the animals to separate naturally, Riggs appears to have made the decision to enter the enclosure and physically intervene. He had done so successfully on previous occasions according to evidence of his handling methods, but investigators noted that pack dynamics among wolves and high-content hybrids can shift rapidly and unpredictably. The moment Riggs stepped between the fighting animals, the pack dynamic apparently changed. Both fighting males redirected their aggression toward him, likely perceiving his intervention as a threat or challenge. The third hybrid, triggered by the sudden pack activity, joined the attack within seconds. The assault came from multiple angles. Injury patterns documented during the autopsy indicated multiple animals attacking simultaneously, with severe wounds to his legs that caused him to fall and catastrophic damage to his throat and neck that likely damaged major blood vessels. The attack was frenzied and sustained, with all 3 animals inflicting injuries across his body. Injury patterns and the extent of tissue damage throughout the enclosure suggested the attack had been prolonged and violent. The animals eventually disengaged and retreated to different areas of the enclosure once the aggression subsided. A distant neighbor checking on the property after noticing Riggs hadn't collected his mail for 3 days discovered the scene on February 7th. The neighbor had become concerned when he drove past and noticed the mailbox overflowing, unusual for Riggs, who typically checked it daily. He found Riggs's body on the enclosure floor, the 3 wolf-dog hybrids resting at the far end of the run. Emergency services and animal control arrived within an hour of the discovery, but Riggs had been dead for several days. The 3 wolf-dog hybrids were tranquilized and subsequently euthanized due to the severity of the attack and the impossibility of safely relocating animals that had killed a human. The investigation confirmed illegal ownership and determined that the victim's decision to physically intervene in the pack fight had likely triggered the fatal attack. Investigators noted that proper safety protocols would have required Riggs to remain outside the enclosure and use noise or water to separate the fighting animals rather than physical intervention. The medical examiner determined that severe neck trauma had caused massive blood loss, with death resulting from a combination of blood loss and damage to his airway. While West Virginia's mountains had demonstrated the danger of pack dynamics, Southern California would soon witness how even animals raised from infancy can become lethally dangerous as they mature. It was June 19, 2015, when the hot afternoon sun beat down on the rural property outside San Diego County's eastern edge. Inside the rented single-story house, Meridian Ashcroft, a 38-year-old former animal trainer, prepared lunch in the kitchen while her 8-year-old male chimpanzee moved through the living room. The chimpanzee had lived with Ashcroft since infancy, but recent months had brought increasingly concerning behavioral changes. Ashcroft had worked in the entertainment animal industry for 15 years, training various species for film and television across Southern California. Her specialty was primates, having handled dozens of chimpanzees during her career. She acquired the chimpanzee in 2007 as a 6-month-old infant, after the production company that owned him discontinued its primate program amid growing criticism. Rather than surrendering the animal to a sanctuary as policy required, Ashcroft kept him illegally, raising him in her home as she would a human child. California law prohibits private ownership of great apes, though enforcement varies across rural areas. Ashcroft's isolated living situation, neighbors scattered across acres of undeveloped land, had allowed her to keep the chimpanzee undetected for 8 years. She had no children and lived alone, having devoted her life to animal training work that had dried up as the industry moved away from great apes. The chimpanzee had been dressed in human clothing as an infant and treated as a surrogate child. Ashcroft fed him at the dinner table, allowed him to sleep in a modified crib, and attempted to toilet train him. As the animal matured, such treatment became increasingly impossible, though she continued allowing him largely free access to the house. Neighbors reported increasingly loud vocalizations from the property over the previous 6 months, including aggressive hooting characteristic of agitated chimpanzees. One neighbor had witnessed the chimpanzee lunging at Ashcroft through a window approximately 3 weeks before the incident, describing a scene where she retreated from the room. No formal complaints had been filed, as neighbors were unsure of the legality of her situation and reluctant to create conflict. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest genetic relatives, sharing approximately 98% of human DNA, but they are also among the most dangerous animals to keep in captivity. Adult male chimpanzees typically weigh between 90 and 130 pounds and possess pound-for-pound strength significantly greater than an adult human male. Their muscles contain a higher proportion of fast-twitch fibers than human muscle, giving them explosive speed and gripping power capable of tearing flesh and breaking bones with terrifying ease. Chimpanzees reach sexual maturity around age 8, at which point male aggression increases dramatically as they compete for dominance. In the wild, male chimpanzees engage in brutal territorial conflicts and establish dominance through violence that can result in severe injuries or death. Captive chimpanzees raised as human children often become extremely dangerous as they mature, unable to integrate into chimpanzee society, but possessing none of the social inhibitions that govern human behavior. According to the investigation's reconstruction, Ashcroft had been preparing food in the kitchen at approximately 2:45 p.m. when the chimpanzee entered and attempted to take items from the counter. She had reportedly been attempting to establish boundaries with the increasingly dominant animal over recent weeks, though such efforts are extremely difficult to manage safely with mature male chimpanzees, whose strength makes physical discipline ineffective. Physical evidence suggested she refused to give the chimpanzee something he wanted, possibly food from the counter, or a specific item he had demanded. The animal's reaction was immediate and explosive. The chimpanzee grabbed Ashcroft's arm with enough force to fracture the bone, his powerful grip crushing the forearm. He used his extraordinary strength to pull her off balance, dragging her to the floor. As she fell, the chimpanzee attacked her face and neck with savage intensity. His powerful hands tore at her face while his teeth delivered crushing bites. The attack focused on areas typical of chimpanzee aggression, the face and throat, with the animal using both his hands and jaws as weapons. The assault was frenzied and sustained, with the chimpanzee inflicting catastrophic facial trauma and likely tearing through major blood vessels in her neck. The pattern of injuries was consistent with documented cases of chimpanzee attacks, which are often chaotic and extraordinarily violent rather than targeted or precise. The chimpanzee eventually ceased the attack and retreated to another room, where he remained until authorities arrived hours later. A neighbor who heard unusual sounds from the property investigated several hours later, concerned by the uncharacteristic silence following a period of aggressive vocalizations. Looking through a window, he discovered Ashcroft's body in the kitchen and immediately contacted emergency services from his vehicle. Emergency services arrived within 30 minutes, but she had been dead for hours. The chimpanzee was tranquilized and removed by a specialized primate rescue team equipped to handle aggressive adult males. The investigation confirmed illegal ownership and noted that the attack pattern was consistent with documented cases of captive chimpanzee aggression against owners. Given the severity of the injuries, investigators believe Ashcroft likely lost consciousness quickly from blood loss and shock. The animal was transferred to a sanctuary equipped to handle aggressive adult males, where he remains in a specialized facility designed for chimpanzees that cannot be integrated into social groups. While California had witnessed the brutality of primate aggression, the wilderness of Idaho would demonstrate that even animals raised from infancy never lose their instinct to ambush prey from above. It was March 8, 2013, when late winter conditions still gripped the remote property in northern Idaho's wilderness. Prescott Halverson, a 45-year-old former hunting guide, walked toward the large outdoor enclosure where his 4-year-old male cougar waited for the evening feeding. The animal had been part of Halverson's life since 2009, when he had acquired the orphaned 6-week-old kitten. Halverson had worked as a professional hunting guide throughout Montana and Idaho for over 20 years, before a severe back injury ended his career in 2008. His horse had spooked during a guided elk hunt and thrown him, resulting in 3 fractured vertebrae and permanent nerve damage that left him unable to work. The cougar had been found as an orphan after its mother was killed by a vehicle on a remote forest road, and Halverson obtained the kitten through connections in the hunting community who knew of his forced retirement and isolation. Over 4 years, the animal had grown into a 140-pound predator living in a half-acre wooded enclosure on Halverson's property. The enclosure cost over $8,000 to construct, representing a significant portion of his disability settlement. Idaho law requires special permits for keeping large predators, permits Halverson had never obtained. His property sat 15 miles from the nearest maintained road, accessible only by 4-wheel drive vehicle in dry weather, and completely inaccessible during winter when snow made the final 5 miles impassable. This isolation had allowed him to keep the cougar undetected for its entire life. His wife had left him 9 months earlier, citing financial problems and her fear of the increasingly aggressive cougar. She told investigators Halverson had become obsessed with the animal, spending hours watching it and refusing to consider surrendering it despite her repeated requests. The enclosure incorporated natural forest terrain, Douglas fir and pine trees, granite boulders, and elevated platforms designed to simulate the cougar's natural habitat. Halverson fed the animal deer meat and occasionally live prey, including rabbits and chickens, maintaining what he believed was the cougar's connection to its wild instincts. His journal, recovered during the investigation, documented his belief that keeping the cougar's hunting abilities sharp was essential to its well-being, though wildlife experts later noted this practice only reinforced dangerous predatory behaviors. Cougars, also called mountain lions or pumas, are solitary ambush predators native to the Americas. Adult males typically weigh between 115 and 160 pounds and measure 6 to 8 feet in length, including the tail. They possess exceptional jumping ability, capable of leaping 18 feet vertically and 40 feet horizontally from a standstill. Cougars prefer to attack from elevated positions, dropping onto prey from above to deliver a killing bite to the back of the neck or base of the skull. Their bite targets the cervical vertebrae, capable of severing the spinal cord and causing immediate paralysis. Unlike social cats such as lions, cougars are solitary and maintain large territories that can exceed 100 square miles for adult males, making them particularly unsuited to captivity, even in large enclosures. Male cougars may become increasingly territorial and aggressive as they mature, especially during breeding season, which occurs in late winter and early spring. Multiple attacks on humans by both wild and captive cougars have been documented, with captive animals showing reduced fear of humans while retaining complete hunting instincts. According to the investigation's timeline, Halverson entered the enclosure at approximately 5:30 p.m., carrying approximately 20 pounds of deer meat in a plastic container. The enclosure's gate design required him to walk approximately 30 feet through the wooded terrain to reach the feeding platform where he typically deposited food. This walking route passed beneath several elevated platforms that the cougar used for resting and observation. The cougar had likely been resting on an elevated platform along Halverson's typical walking route. The animal's behavior was consistent with the heightened territorial aggression associated with breeding season, which peaks in late winter when male cougars become increasingly intolerant of intrusions into their territory. As Halverson walked beneath the platform, focused on navigating the uneven terrain while carrying the heavy container, the cougar appears to have launched its attack from above. The animal dropped onto Halverson's back and shoulders, its 140 pounds of muscle and momentum driving him face first into the ground. The impact knocked the food container from his hands and likely stunned him, giving him little or no opportunity to defend himself. The cougar's jaws closed around the back of Halverson's neck, targeting the cervical spine as the animal's hunting instincts dictated. The bite caused catastrophic trauma to his upper spinal column, consistent with the ambush technique cougars use on prey in the wild. Halverson's body went limp as the spinal damage would have caused paralysis, and the powerful bite inflicted deep puncture wounds into the tissue surrounding his neck and skull. The cougar eventually released and moved away. Halverson's body lay motionless near the feeding platform as the cougar retreated to a distant corner of the enclosure. The remote location and Halverson's isolated lifestyle meant the body was not discovered for 4 days. A friend who had been unable to reach him by phone drove to the property on March 12th, navigating the difficult road access to check on him. After receiving no response to repeated calls and knocking, and discovering Halverson's truck parked near the house, the friend investigated the property and spotted Halverson's body through the enclosure fencing. He contacted authorities from a safe distance, unwilling to approach while the cougar remained present. Law enforcement and wildlife officials arrived within 2 hours, accessing the remote property with four-wheel drive vehicles. The cougar was tranquilized using a dart rifle and subsequently euthanized due to the fatal attack and the impossibility of releasing a habituated animal into the wild. The investigation confirmed illegal ownership and determined that the attack pattern was consistent with natural cougar hunting behavior, including the ambush from an elevated position and the bite targeting the cervical spine. The medical examiner determined that Halverson had died from catastrophic spinal injury, with the official cause of death listed as respiratory failure resulting from damage to the nerves controlling his diaphragm. Death would have followed rapidly after the initial attack. Halverson's death demonstrated that even years of familiarity cannot override the ambush instincts of apex predators, and that animals raised from infancy retain complete hunting capabilities when they reach maturity. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.